cloud. I will give you hosting, or no, I'm going to make
maybe go live first and then
live first, yeah. Are you unmuted?
That was me, I think.
Yeah, you're feeding back.
Hold on.
Yeah, you don't want to unmute the. Maybe it's me.
Thanks, everyone. I just put in the chat, I'm really curious what folks are interested in learning about hemp fiber in this session. So please put that in the chat. Welcome. Sounds good now, right? The audio is coming through clear.
Really great. Better?
Yeah, seems like we're doing it. Well, thanks everyone. I hope your lunch break was good. And thanks for joining us. My name's Erin, and I'm actually calling in from Haudenosaunee territory in Northern California. And I've been working with Winona for the past 3 years on helping move the hemp fiber into garments, soft, t-shirts, that sort of thing. So we're getting there. Winona, you want to say anything?
Yeah, ani nindo magana do kalo my relatives, binesi kweoma. I'm here on Round Lake on the White Earth Reservation at Winona's Hemp, and I'm really grateful that everybody's come on and really learned a lot today. Listening to everybody, I've been listening. I was on my friend's account. If you didn't think I was listening, I was actually listening. And I'm in my kitchen doing some things. So thank you though for coming on, and we're really excited to share with you about our adventure. Kind of an adventure, right, Erin?
And such an adventure.
Yes, such an adventure trying to find the path to a shirt like this. How do you do that? That's the question we were asking. And like, how do you take something and how do you turn it into that? And how do you do it if you don't want to make a big mess in the world and use a bunch of chemicals and crazy stuff and invoke a lot of bad ideas? So how do you do it? That's been our question at Winona's Hemp and here at Anishinaabe Agriculture, we're the sponsors of this conference, because what we know is that we're really on a big learning journey. And one of my coaches and friends on this journey is Erin. And so we asked her to, she keeps track of all the stories, and well, we don't tell her all, but a bunch of them. And she knows a little history. So we're happy to share with you. And I thought we'd let Erin start a little bit and then I'll chime in.
Great. So I'm going to share briefly an image just so folks can kind of envision a potential vision for what could be possible for having hemp fiber coming out of the space, the place that Winona and her team are based in. So this is a vision of what's possible. And right now, Winona has a number of initiatives that are represented here that are actively working towards this new green revolution. There's the Aking, there's the Eighth Fire Solar, there's Anishinaabe Agriculture Institute, and all the work being done to bring back potatoes and maize and all your heirloom crops and your indigenous staple crops there. And then there's this vision of how do we bring decortication of the hemp fiber. And decortication, as Marcus showed earlier in the session, is basically breaking the fiber, the outside of the hemp, from the inside, the woody core. And so, as Marcus shared, you can use the woody core for hempcrete, you can use it for animal bedding, there's all sorts of uses for that woody material. And then the fiber can be used in the case of what Jose may have already talked about, I hope I haven't missed his session yet, but Jose LaSalle can be used for carbonization to create hemp supercapacitors. It can also be used to blend with other fibers to create cloth and fiber materials. And so this vision of actually being able to do that processing on at there, in Callaway and surrounding areas on Anishinaabe territory is a really exciting prospect, because what it could mean would be a cooperatively owned mill infrastructure that could be partially owned by Aking and partially owned by farmers. And so any profits that would come from selling that decorticated fiber material would accrue to Aking, but also to hemp farmers. And really the goal here would be, how do we find a pathway where hemp farming is just as profitable, if not more so, than some of the conventional commodity crops that are being grown in the region right now that are currently depleting soil and waters, but could be displaced by a profitable crop that could be sold and produce viable clothing goods in the region. Anything to add, Winona, before we go on about the vision?
The only thing I would say also, no, I mean, in the vision, Winona's hemp is part of it, and that really great graphic on the left side as I'm looking at it is from Native Harvest, one of the affiliates at White Earth Land Recovery Project. But just showing a collaborative of work that has occurred in this community over years. And just to reiterate, which I think everybody here knows, that like the majority of what this fiber plant is in fact the herd. But that 30% or 25% that's left, that's the object of our affection over here at Winona's Hemp is, what do you do with that? And so that's it, Erin. Go back to your cool presentation.
Great. And I just want to make sure that I'm answering any questions. Okay. Do you have performas on fiber outlets? This is a great question from Cindy. Thank you for this. So I'm thinking this question is around kind of the sales channels and where to actually, what type of price might be available and where to sell the fiber. So I want to step back and say, the ultimate vision that I've been working on with Winona is to actually have a vertically integrated hemp mill that would do everything from seed to garment. And I'll show an image in a moment that depicts that. But this idea that right now in the, trillion-dollar global textile industry, we have a process where consumers are very, very far away, and there's a lot of transport costs and distances between each step in the process. So if you were to buy a hemp garment from Patagonia right now, for as an example, all of the hemp is being grown in China. It's being processed, and most of it is being degummed, which is the softening process of the fiber, through caustic chemical means that are polluting waterways. Even a company such as Patagonia, because we've lost the infrastructure to be able to process hemp into soft fibers. So when we look at outlets for sales, the ultimate goal is actually not to sell the fiber to a Patagonia or another company, but the ultimate goal is actually to have all the processing happen in your region in northern Minnesota. Now, there's going to be many steps along the journey, as Winona said, towards that process. And so the first step is finding values-aligned partners that can actually come in, help us along the journey, help with philanthropic capital, and also help find outlets for very, very low interest loans capital. So kind of an integrated capital approach. And Patagonia has expressed interest in being an initial off-taker. So purchasing a portion of the initial degummed fiber that we will be producing, and others like it. There's other values aligned companies that we're in conversation with that are textile focused companies, but the ultimate vision would not be to sell to them long term. It would be to have our own hemp products coming off of the locally owned mill. So hopefully that answers the question. Here's another one coming in, and I really want to make this as interactive as possible to make it useful for you all. So
Erin, you might want to also share a little bit about our process and you know, how, I mean, I'm not sure that everybody has the picture of all the different processes, you know, what the sketching is. I mean, you know, so we started looking at this, and you're looking at like real old equipment, just like the Menominee's got that one real old thing. And we're like, hey, how'd they get from that size to big, right? And so then we started looking at all this equipment, and we started growing it. This is our field from a couple years ago. This is the tribal field, actually. And that's what our crop looked like. And we didn't know what it was going to look like, but that was a bounce field from the previous field. That's all volunteer hemp. That was all volunteer. And I just want to share that because you don't have to seed it every year, apparently. They don't call it weed for nothing. Anyway, want to show the next picture. Right, and so this is like the old stuff. Yeah, here you go.
I'm going to skip to that. Let's see, I should have pulled this up. Let me pull up the processing chart that you're referring to.
Yeah.
So this is the whole kind of soup to nuts from seed over here, the hemp plant, to a shirt over here on the right side. And I'm so glad that Marcus, for those that were able to see that presentation from Marcus, that was a great example of one step of the process, which was the breaking. And there's so many different ways to do the breaking. Obviously, they were showing a very bespoke, low-tech method that often when you get low-tech methods, it's a higher labor cost when you're thinking about that. And Marcus even alluded to that. But yeah, the harvesting, where we might even have a seed harvest as well, then the decortication, then you got to clean that fiber. So that often involves like a combing process. For those that were at the Indigenous Hemp Conference last year, we actually had Maddie show that kind of combing process. Degumming is that chemical process that I mentioned, but we've found a domestic US processor that does a degumming process that's highly clean, that they actually have a life cycle analysis that shows that there's not toxic chemical residue wastes coming out of their degumming process. And then to get it to a shirt, once you have this soft fiber, next step entails either blending it with other forms. So you could blend it with a wool fiber, or often it's blended with cotton, spinning it into a yarn, and then weaving it into a canvas or a full fabric. Dyeing is often entailed to make it a different color. And then you cut it up and sew it into a garment, and then it goes to retail. So this is kind of that whole step in the system. And I'll go back to Jose's questions, which I think are really important. So what properties of the stock need to be tested before going into the decorticator? This is a great question. I want to share kind of at least our process. So the first step that we're doing with our decorticating partner is we are sending them a small sample, about 20 pounds of the fiber, and they're decorticating that right now. What we're looking for is level of retting or level of kind of intact fiber. So level of molds contamination, we're looking for it to be a very clean fiber that doesn't have a lot of mold or different residues. We're also looking for strength. So they'll be testing it through the decorticator and making sure that it's easy to break off of the fiber, but that it's also a strong fiber coming out of that. And they have a number of specifications that we're working with. The other kind of specification would be if the hemp fiber ideally it wouldn't have gone to seed because it makes a higher quality fiber if it doesn't go to seed before you harvest. However, there are dual varieties like Anka that Marcus mentioned that we're piloting how to do both fiber and seed, so we could actually have two outputs from one field. And I'll talk more in a minute about the kind of work we're doing on researching different methods of growing that are regenerative, that are investing in soil health. So what is degumming? Just very briefly, the hemp fiber stem has what's called lignins, which are the different kind of components of the carbohydrate, cellulosic fiber material. And those lignins are hard and gummy. And so the degumming process is a way to break down those gummy components of the fiber so that you can have a soft, pliable, cloth-like warm thing that you would want to put on your body. And
it's like pectin. It's
pectins,
like pectin.
Yep. Yes, exactly.
It's like pectin, which is like what you do to make your jelly stiff, right?
Exactly.
So it's got the same thing. So that's when I understood that. I was like, oh yeah, I get it. So it's common in certain plants. Anyway, just adding that.
Yeah, I know. These we're relearning all our vocabulary for these basic principles. So is fungal field retting needed? It depends on which decortication partner you're going with. So there's so many different, in the history books, you can pore over all these different processes for decortication and degumming. Field retting is one way to break down some of those pectins that Winona was mentioning. And that field retting, so there's very much low-tech ways to field ret and break down those pectins. And then some of the decorting partners that we've talked to have said, well, we actually don't want you to field ret because our degumming process is good enough that we can actually break down those pectins ourselves. And so it really depends on your strategic partnerships and what is required of your specific decorticator or degumming processor.
I just want to add in, this is part of what we're trying to understand, because a lot of the data that you get, like people in Colorado, they'll talk about what it's like to grow hemp, and that's like super interesting, but Colorado isn't Minnesota. Minnesota is more like probably the Czech Republic or Romania. I don't really know. But so, the questions are what varieties grow well there. And then, my theory is, which may or may not be true, is that if Mother Nature could do it, that's the best thing. Like, use as much natural energy to make things into the shape you want, but you got to be really smart. And so I got questions like, how a lot of people on this call probably, or on this in this conference, know how to make hominy. So we make hominy with lye, right? Which comes from our ashes. Does that work in this? Those kind of questions are questions of restoring and use of traditional and indigenous and long-term technologies with a plant that's been around so long, so you don't end up with a bunch of stuff you can't pronounce in your water, So, that's a lot. It's a process, and we're really, really learning, the whole thing. And then one of the questions I ask a lot is we make rope too. And so I'm really interested in rope. And rope seems to be okay still with the lignin in it. I don't know, or some of it, anyway. I'm gonna hand it back to Erin because she's the fiber person, but these are the things we're trying to investigate, and it's really a learning process. It's super, super interesting, but yeah.
No, and I think, Winona, you're exactly right that one of the things to be aware of is how many yields can we get from a given cropping system. So can we get rope? Can we get herd? Can't we get a small amount of fiber to be sold to other companies and to make sure that the revenue side of the equation adds up? There were there was a few questions in the chat coming up around, what is the kind of process interest about the fiber processing. And so I just wanted to share this because this is kind of our map of, if you're looking to process the fiber in Turtle Island, in this continent at the very least, it's like Winona said, it's been a very incredible journey for us to identify who could even help us in this regard, because most of the processing, as I mentioned early on, it's all been outsourced to China, or there's a little bit of old processing in Europe and in Eastern Europe. So what we did is we found that there's a number of companies, but most of them are doing pieces of the equation, but not the entire system from decortication to degumming. And a lot of them are what I call feasibility. So meaning they're still startups. They haven't successfully sold their decortication machinery or had it used. And so I just wanted to share this, that like, there's lots of different companies doing lots of different things. And I'll share a matrix in a moment so you can see the names of some of the companies. And then there's some companies that, they say they do the entire process in the US, but it's actually all happening overseas. So you really, really need to be discerning about who you're partnering with. And some of these companies are very, very expensive. So we're talking $2 million to $10 million capital expense to purchase their decortication, degumming machinery. And we feel really fortunate to actually have found someone who we're doing diligence with that is a more affordable, more cost-effective price for kind of scaled up factory scale machinery to do decortication that has a throughput that would be reasonable for a mill capacity. And then I also want to just give a nod that like the traditional manual processing that's also happening in this country, that's being done in many different regions, everyone from Roy Katie and the Navajo to kind of hand spinners that are, successfully making hemp garments by doing it all kind of low tech in their own homes, on their own farms. But that's a different scale in terms of how much you can produce at that type of scale and how labor intensive it is. So we're looking for like a middle ground of something where we could send a good amount of hemp through the milling machinery, provide life affirming wages and jobs for folks, and be able to produce a good amount of garments and clothing out of that scale. And I'll just share this here for folks that are interested. Here is a list of some of the companies that we've been able to find that are doing this, and we've been vetting them to try and see which are real decortication options. And I would say most of these on this list are quite expensive. Like I mentioned, the 2 million and up cost. So although I would point out that taproot fiber is trying to do a smaller scale, but in any case, it's been quite a journey, Winona, to find the right decortication partner, right? So that's an important one. I have one more slide to share. Oh, go ahead, Winona.
Well, I was just going to show, in a minute, I'll show the picture of, do you have a picture of Roy's rug and the spinning?
Yes, I do. Let me show that. Yeah, that's a really great one. I'm not sure if I have the
only ones we've seen do it actually, hats off to Ira, because the only people we ever saw do something actually with our hemp fiber all the way were the Dene people who are producing some rugs with our fiber that we set down them. And here's our Navajo churro sheep. And thanks to Roy Katie and the rugs that they're making down there. And we're proud to be part of that at Winona's Hemp, be able to share that. And when the big industrial guys show us the cool equipment, we'll be there too. But we're grateful for this partnership as the first Dene hemp fiber artisan work. Yeah.
It's amazing. And I want to say something that is really beautiful about blending hemp and wool, which Roy and his team have been doing for many, many moons. There's one of the things that I've learned in FiberShed, which Marcus mentioned, has been learning along this way. So I'm in the bioregion in Northern California that produces actually a lot of wool. And so my pathway into hemp was through wool, because I found that one of the problems with wool is that if well, problems and opportunities is wool is this magical fiber that felts. And so you can make all these felted hats and felted garments, and it's a really warm fiber for cold winters. But if you want to not have your wool felt, there's this whole sort of industrial processes that they put wool through to keep it from felting, because basically what the process of felting is the fibers stick to one another. They kind of latch onto one another. So if you were to throw wool into your washing machine in your house, it could transform the shirt so much that it would refelt itself, and it would basically become a big wool glob instead of a shirt. So what they do to avoid that happening in kind of the industrial textile system is they put it through lots of toxic chemicals, or they coat the fibers with plastic. But if you blend wool and hemp has this miraculous quality of hooking on to those wool fibers and making it possible so that you don't have to use all those toxic chemicals. You can make hemp wool blended fibers that can even go into a conventional washing machine, and you can just wash the sock and have it still come out a sock at the end. And so this is actually a really exciting prospect for some of the companies we're in conversation with that want to have locally sourced wool and hemp and still want it to be accessible for like the average consumer who wants to have a sock that you can throw in the wash, and it's easy and affordable and easy to use, and still kind of conforms to the norms of our conventional lifestyle. And so that I just wanted to add in something about this partnership between the sheep and the hemp plants. That's really exciting, not to mention the fertility management that sheep can have if you're using them to kind of graze down your weeds in a hemp field, and all sorts of other things like that. I'm going to stop and just see if there's any questions coming up in the Connects Me, and then I want to talk about some soil building that we've been working on. Okay, please keep the questions coming. I don't see any right this moment, so maybe I'll go and talk a little bit about some of the objectives we have around soil building and growing in the various hemp fields that Winona has been tending to. So here is Winona in her hemp field. And so we are going to be growing, well, I shouldn't say we, the amazing farm team, Winona's amazing farm team is going to be growing 6 acres in 2021. And the goal continuously is to continuously look at reducing growing costs and reducing the inputs to the fields. As Winona mentioned, they are doing some incredible work and research on trialing how the hemp reseeds, so you don't have to always be buying new seed cost inputs, and you can reduce planting labor. There's so many advantages to looking at how to have a self-seeding hemp field. We're also in conversations with Rodale Institute, which is a kind of larger organic, a leader kind of research in the organic space and how to do soil fertility in a different way that reduces our reliance on chemical fertilizers. And as I mentioned earlier in Marcus's session, they produced a report in 2019-2020 that documented their trials. These are Rodale Institute has fields in Pennsylvania, and they did trials of growing hemp in an intercropped system with sorghum and wheat and other crops that could be sold. And the use of hemp actually dramatically reduced the weediness of the fields. So the hemp was actually just grown as like weed suppression crop, but it's a weed suppression crop that they actually could harvest and, has so many different markets, as so many others on this conference have already mentioned. So we're looking at, working with Rodale to understand better how the hemp can be used in an intercrop system with potentially other crops that Winona and her team at Anishinaabe Agriculture Institute are researching, other indigenous crops, other important things like corn and beans and legumes. And then, of course, just ongoing training on, how do we harvest? How do we grow? How do we create other, and one of the things that's really exciting that Winona's alerted me to is that there's a tremendous opportunity to harvest waste streams. So right now there might be fish waste that's coming out of some of these processing infrastructure in the region. How do we harvest and put that to use on the fields as soil inputs and soil fertility?
I want to say something else here. I keep moving a little bit, yeah, we're really interested in how we localize everything. Because everything has a carbon footprint. And so I don't want to hear like that bat guana is really good if I don't have a lot of bats hanging around. It's not helpful. What we need to do is figure out what wealth is in terms of the NPK or whatever, what wealth is out there in terms of soil nutrients that's local and is probably being misapplied or just not, captured at all because we become so wasteful, all the way across from no composting to whatever. And so that's a lot of what we've been really interested in looking at. And then another thing we haven't quite got to yet, but I'd be really interested in is the bioremediation. And Ira talked some about that. But we have a lot of big messes out here in Indian country, more toxic waste sites than anybody. And, Navajo has 500 abandoned uranium mines. So, it'd be great if something could pull things out, and, I think about these things and we all do. But, so there's a lot of potential for research that tribes need to do, nations need to do, and farmers. But anyway, continue on, please, Erin.
Well, I'd love to see if there's any questions coming up from participants. And I could talk a little bit more about fiber, or the other thought that I had was to share a little bit about the hempcrete research that's been done and the vision for, because as you said, there is a larger portion of the hemp involved in the hempcrete, involved in that becomes hemp herds. So what do you do with those herds? But just curious, Jason, if there are any questions coming up from other folks that are attending this session, or if there's anything we should address before we go into talking about hempcrete. When hemp and wool are mixed, what technique is used to blend them? Great question. So that's actually a spinning technique. And I myself am a very novice spinner. So I don't have a lot of insight into that other than, I guess Roy would definitely be able to speak to this. We've watched incredible videos of him, using a pedal to spin manually the different fibers together. But essentially, if you can imagine like an old scale spinning wheel, you have a couple different strands, and as you pedal the wheel and make the wheel turn, it allows you to spin together different sorts of fibers to make what would be the word? A combined yarn that has multiple different fiber blends into it. Okay, so this question about large scale production. Large scale, what would you mean by large scale? Our pursuit has kind of been this mid-scale, farm scale production that could harvest that would be a mill. So the scale specifically that we're looking at would be the mill infrastructure could accommodate about 600 acres of local regionally produced hemp. And then you could add more lines to that as you scaled up. But even getting 600 acres of corn or soy converted into a regenerative soil building hemp polyculture grow field could be an amazing benefit to kind of reducing some of the negative impacts from the cropping systems conventionally. But I am curious what you mean by large scale.
Yeah, I mean, and I just want to add to that because, we're looking at a lot of these questions of size matters. And so like how much energy input, how much distance, how much, all of those questions are really the kind of, questions that we have. But I also know, as does everybody here, that if you want to change the world, you got to have scale. So I could make some, cool little hemp doilies, but that's not going to be as revolutionary as making canvas, and make canvas at the scale just to cover the boats in Minnesota. Oh, you got to have some mills for that. I mean, they had 11 mills in Minnesota. So we are interested in that scale, but we believe that what my experience is as a farmer and as a community organizer, whatever is that developing the relationship to the plant, understanding what we're doing, remembering what we're doing, because we're all in this process of like listening to like all these different things, and then just figuring out how to restore relationship, plant, then scale. That's our strategy. So we understand and don't come in with a big idea, but the technologies we're super interested in, like Erin said, are take this and then add 4 more, and then it's 4 times as big. And then say our tribe, White Earth, maybe White Earth, Red Lake, Sisseton share 1 mill, or maybe not, because there's enough room in this industry for Sisseton to do the bioplastics and, Turtle Mountain to do the hempcrete. I mean, there's a lot of room for all of these manufacturing facilities, but as Alex said at the beginning, maybe not every nation want to have every facility. At the same time, some of them, it is really, as we relocalize and practice self-reliance and survival in the upcoming era, we're going to want to have stuff a little closer. Don't count on Amazon Prime delivering your hempcrete bricks. Make them local. And so I think that that's part of what this is too, is in the past 20 years, they deindustrialized the textile industry. We used to make stuff here. We don't make anything here. It's all made in China and Pakistan in sweatshops, So if we were going to rebuild that whole thing, we don't want to rebuild sweatshops. We want to rebuild, manufacturing industries for working class people, that are highly trained and have a decent living, but also at a scale that doesn't make, such a big mess. So this is the things that we're really interested in, because I think we know it all matters. We do. As Indigenous people, we know all of those decisions matter. And so that's a lot of our approach. And so tribal scaled, native, reservation scaled projects, that maybe are aggregated or, are joined together or that's a lot of our thinking. Anyway.
Absolutely. And just one instance of how meaningful that became even last year was accessing seeds. A lot of the seed sourcing that we did was from Europe. And when COVID hit, the time lags and the difficulty of actually sourcing the seed that we had ordered, it actually delayed the whole production system. So we got our seeds so much later due to COVID that, our seed planting date got pushed back. And so one thing I really appreciate, Winona, about your work is this idea of, building up your seed sovereignty and thinking about ways to save seeds and all of that too.
Well, I want to say a couple of things on that. No, so what Erin's talking about here, you're all looking at me, but who did most of this is Ronnie Chilton. I don't know where he is in the audience or something like that, but I can't operate a piece of farm equipment that looks anything like anything Ronnie Chilton could do, or Darren Clare. Those guys put in the field. They put in all the fertilizer. And this is small scale. This isn't real big. Our farming equipment is from last century, definitely. And it's not at a scale that, but it's family farm equipment. That's what we use here. And so our team did that. And part of what we also noticed is that their seeds adapted to this area. And so I've been talking, and we provided some seeds to Red Lake last year and out to Cheyenne River, and we sent some over by Rosebud, I think. We sent them around Oneida, certainly. We sent them all these seeds that we got in from the Patagonia people in Europe, and we found some other local seed sources, but those seeds that came from Europe need to be adapted. And then there's real old feral seeds around here, being the ones that they had from the 1930s that they criminalized and they left all over the reservations. Those guys are probably the tough guys. And so we want to make sure that those seeds are rematriated, to our nations, rematriated so that the seeds, are not are not owned by others because they have been growing in our land for long enough, you know? So that's all I want to add on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a segue into, so this question around what kind of decorticator do you have available? When you were mentioning the farm scale equipment that is, refurbishing equipment that farms have lying around, same principle applies to the decortication. So, Pamela, just to clarify, Winona purchased a decorticator from China that they've been doing kind of a small scale decortication processing on. But for the scale that the woman from, the Primal Wellness, I'm not sure, woman or they, them, what they're referring to in terms of the 10 tons scale, the Chinese decorticator that Winona purchased wouldn't be able to accommodate that type of scale because it's very time consuming to feed it and then to sort out what comes out of that decortication. But so what we're looking at, the decortication that we are looking at purchasing from this partner is going to be a 10-ton scale decortication that will be able to accommodate that type of scale over the course of an entire year, because I think the throughput is a much smaller hourly throughput. It would be like maybe quarter ton, somewhere around 1,000 pounds throughput an hour. So but we don't have that available yet. That's not, we haven't developed that infrastructure yet. We're partnering to diligence that decorticator and make sure it's going to work and produce exactly the type of quality that Winona would like to see from the hemp that Ronnie and others have spent so much energy and life force energy into growing. If you're interested in accessing or acquiring a decorticator, I'd be happy. I'll put my email in, and I'd be happy to connect with you offline about your particular custom needs, because I think that is one of the things that is so important, is to look specifically at your needs and find the right decortication partner for your needs, because there's a lot of companies out there that are selling decorticators now, and also are even marketing it in a kind of hyperbolic way around what it can do. But the most important thing to think about is what is the end output that you need for the customers that you're in correspondence with, or the final output of the fiber that you're going to be trying to make. So don't think just, okay, what decorticator? Think first about the end use. Make sure you have a really good sense of what you need to see it looking like coming out of, and then backcast to what kind of infrastructure you need to produce that. Because some of the equipment that we've vetted and looked at that's supposedly selling decortication has a process that's like ripping up the fiber and pounding it and depleting the quality of the fiber. And so it's not even going to be, you're going to spend a tremendous amount of money up front buying this equipment. And then you're going to come to the partner that you're trying to sell it to, and they're going to look at it and say, this is not the quality that we need. This is terrible quality. We can't use this. So just being mindful of that.
I think that one thing that I don't know if we can do it, but we could try, is that we could kind of it's not like a consumer's report, but we could say, well, this is our experience, because for instance, we saw some cool equipment up in Thief River Falls, and I liked that, but it was like a hammer mill, right? And it was just, and so it took the fiber and it everything was pounded. So it'd be good for hempcrete, seemed like, but not if you were trying to make clothing, but so there's different things that we've learned, because people might have different, we all do have different interests, but that was super interesting because they were local, I mean, I've been looking and buying stuff from China, and then I was over there looking at the Belgian equipment, and then all of a sudden I was like, hey, those guys is just down the road, but they have Forsberg equipment. They make all this farm equipment, and they got some things there. So we could definitely share kind of our experiences. And we don't got a dog in this fight. I don't know where that term came from, but anyway, you know what I mean? Is You know, we're not repping a certain business here. You know, we're trying to figure out like what works for us, thinking that that'll probably be helpful for other people, and sharing that knowledge, because as we said at the beginning, this is going to be about cooperation. If you want to change the world, better find some pals, you know?
So I'm so excited that some folks are interested in hempcrete, and I'll just be brief about this because it seems like folks are on the call that know a lot more about this than I do. But we have been partnering and looking for folks who, and Winona's even taught a workshop last year, hosted a workshop. This idea of actually combining the hemp herds with some sort of binder, and there's a lot of different, there's a lot of research coming out around how to make that binder as locally sourced as possible and as low carbon as possible, right? Because anytime you're using like a lime or some sort of mineral composition, you are getting into some carbon emissions to source that. But the idea being, how could we create some hempcrete homes that would actually build up the housing infrastructure for houses right now that are less than ideal, less than optimal for folks in the community, particularly elders, particularly folks that might not otherwise have access to high quality housing, and to make it as non-toxic as possible. And one idea to do this is actually helping to develop an industry around prefabricated wall systems. So one of the challenges with hempcrete is the drying time. So if you're pouring hempcrete into molds on site in the exact house that you are trying to build, it will take a good amount of time, weeks or even months, to cure that hemp in place before the house can be inhabited. And so the Parsons School of Design, which invited Winona out to speak at a conference before COVID, has done a lot of research there, and they're based in New York, and they have architectural engineering students and design students, and they've been doing a lot of research around how do folks leverage and work with existing infrastructure, whether that be concrete block makers local to the community, or bricklayers or tradespeople that already have experience working with materials and laying them out, to bring in a hempcrete industry. And so one of the idea that's exciting that just came out in their new report is this idea of having prefabricated wall systems, where you actually would have a factory that's managing the process of building these prefab wall systems. And then you just transport those wall systems on site. And you can put up a house in a much simpler and more cost-effective time horizon. So that's one concept we're exploring. There's a lot more to explore in the realm of hempcrete, but ideally having a local outlet for the herds in a way that would really support housing and non-toxic housing and a use for those herds. So there's a question coming up around, can you speak to the vision of farming hemp and sourcing fiber into the textile economy as a financial backbone to then build an integrated farming venture from there with other crops and or raising animals?
Well, go, Erin.
Well, I guess I would just say, part of it is a vision, but part of it is already happening. I mean, one of the things that is so inspiring about Winona's work is the integration of horses into the agricultural system, not just from this perspective of therapeutic connection to animals and helping people regain that connection, but also some of the work you've done around, having horse-drawn plow. I don't know if you want to speak to any of that, Winona. That seems relevant to me.
I mean, in part, if you're trying to do post-petroleum agriculture, then that, and I'm not very techie, but we've been using a lot of horse farming and partnering with the Amish. That's been really interesting because we're a horse people and those guys are really horse people. And so we put in a couple acres, one of corn and one of hemp, with our Amish friend Jonathan. And they borrowed some of our horses. It was really great. And so we're learning, you know, those, you know, we're learning from them. But, you know, these are the kind of questions that you ask about scale, you know, because not everybody, you know, I mean, a horsepower scales your ability to farm from your power, you know, it's just what scale are you talking about? You know, and so that's been a lot of our interest. And then of course, the integration of, you know, the soil and the different crops. I mean, Winona's hemp farm is really an integrated, you know, pretty integrated set of operations of like a lot of youth, mostly. I mean, just because everybody, it got a lot bigger during COVID because everybody moved in with me. And so, you know, at a certain point now I'm down to 3 or 4, but I had like 7 or 8 14-year-olds, you know, and so then you're teaching them how to plant and farm and harvest, and they're learning about all of those things, and then they're farming with their horses because they're their horses. And that's been a lot of our interest in teaching a next generation of farmers, you know, as well. And then in that, having this really integrated, I mean, at Winona's hemp farm, you know, we grow what we always did, which is corn, beans, squash, potatoes, like the cool purple potatoes, you know, and then I'm a big fan of basil, so I've been working at this basil pesto. I have a really good basil, a hemp pesto that we've developed that I'm very proud of. And so I've been looking at developing kind of an integrated with the hemp as foods, but along with our traditional foods and varietals, and then adding some of the CBDs into some of our specialty products. So, you know, it's a really good opportunity, you know, to add a lot of these different elements and integrate your farm. But remember back in the, you know, back then, with the sensible people, everybody had hemp on their farm anyway because they used it for their rope. So every farm had a 1/4 acre of hemp and a 1/4 acre of linen or flax for their rope and their fabric. And so I think that hemp should be part of an integrated farming operation, so you can have all your rope made out of hemp with your little rope maker, you know, and or, you know, have your neighbors make some rope for you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then just to add, Jose, that the research that we're going to be embarking on with Rodale is also to support some of those ideas around kind of how do you really have a financially viable model that other farmers in the area would want to emulate by, you know, intercropping those different crops that Winona mentioned around the corn, the squash, the beans with the hemp, and even, you know, if of interest, other animals, including sheep for grazing down stubble, and adding goats, animal manure as well. So that's a great question, and it's a very exciting opportunity. And I really look at kind of what Anishinaabe Agriculture Institute is doing is modeling at their various farms what could be possible on a regional basis, and obviously partnering with folks like the Amish and others in the region to really show, you know, what is possible when we aren't confined to just what we can see right in front of us, but we can have a larger vision of what the next green revolution could look like. Well, I think that I'm curious if any other, let's see, for mixed crop, small integrated farms, what is the legal system right now for individuals in Minnesota being able to grow hemp off res, and what if they're not enrolled tribal members? Maybe Winona, you could speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, I grow off the reservation. My tribe does not have a hemp permitting process. You know, Red Lake does, but White Earth does not. And so I've grown with a state, you know, for 5 years. I have received a license from the Minnesota Department of Agriculture to do hemp, really just trying to sort this all out. And, you know, and work on it. So, you know, I'm a tribal member farming off reservation with a state permit. So the state is actually quite supportive, you know, of the hemp industry. I mean, you heard the MDA you know, I was grateful that they came on and told us about all their programs, and, you know, they've been with us from the beginning. So yeah, there's a lot of ways. And in fact, the state, you know, just go look at the program, and, you know, maybe you partner with someone, because I don't know how much the permit costs this year, but it's probably like $500 or something. You know, I mean, that's not the ideal situation, but, you know, figure it out, or come to see us at Winona's Hemp Farm over by Osage, you know, you really can't miss us. We're the big cannabis painting on and you know, Ojibwe beadwork on the farm on the corner. So, you know, and you could find us online.
Yeah, the $500 fee has been actually really surprising, and for me, just because from the cost standpoint, that really is a huge cost basis that affects your viability of your crop. So, you know, for those that are interested in, you know, in how to make hemp scale, I think looking at that and you know, partnering with Minnesota Department of Ag to figure out if there's ways to, you know, reduce that cost over time and be able to you know, be growing this crop with less burdensome permitting fees would be a really important kind of ingredient to throw into the pot and throw into the mix. And I'm sure they're working on it too. It's probably not an easy thing for your Department of Ag to be monitoring and tracking and all the, you know, all the levels of engagement they need to do to make sure that the THC content is appropriate and all of that. But that would be something to collectively look at as we want to see more and more people growing this really amazing crop and doing so in a way that is regenerative and supportive of soil health.
You know, I think I also want to say that with, you know, that the Trump administration was not a proponent of hemp. And so a lot of the situation that the Minnesota Department of Agriculture and tribes find themselves into is reacting after you know, a Trump administration, a Trump presidency. And so I'm hopeful that the Walz administration and the Minnesota Department of Agriculture will definitely, you know, be able to get a little breathing room and do support. If you want equity, you got to make sure people can be at the table. And you know, so you know, thanks for bringing that up. And you know, we know that the future is going to be green.
That's all we got. I think just leaving it there, and thank you so much for everyone who showed up. And I did put my email in the Evenium chat so that if anybody has follow-up questions, feel free to email me, and I'm happy to share as much as we've learned and connect you to folks in the industry who might be appropriate for your kind of scale of processing and what you want to do with the fiber. Yeah, it's been quite an honor to be on this journey with you, Winona.
It's been great. Thank you so much, Erin, for all your hard work, and thanks for letting us present. Thanks for listening to us.
Okay. Bye, everyone.